Hello everybody, welcome back. So this video is actually recorded after the mini-series is finished because I think I have to mention these two important concepts to you before this little chapter about like network connection ends. One is asynchronous function and the other one is completion handler. So an asynchronous function in computer science usually means it you won't know like when this chunk of code will be executed. So it's like it will be executed only if some certain event is triggered. So the execution time of that function is asynchronous with the things happening on the main thread. So these kind of functions, they usually run on a background thread, like independent with the main thread. And so a completion handler is a function which contains a chunk of code, and that chunk of code will only be executed when the function, like the function uses it, is like finished. So it's like this function will usually be passed into another function as a parameter, and when the parent function thinks it's time to trigger this completion handler, it will pass some parameter into this completion handler and let it execute. And usually these functions, they are asynchronous. So the chunk of code inside a completion handler is usually on an independent thread with the other things happening on the main thread. Okay. So remember that in Swift, functions or methods, they are first-class objects, which means you can store them or pass them as parameters into other functions. You can do this like similar stuff using function pointers in C or C++, but that's a relatively indirect way. So you can do this directly in Swift, which is nice. So the first thing is that I'll actually show you what's the difference between running something on main thread and running something in a asynchronous block. So remember that last video we wrote this load cats method and we coded in our view did load, I think. View, oh yeah, here, view did load. So when we are loading our main screen, we will call this function and load our cats from the internet. So let's actually make some changes to our load cats. So we already have a completion handler inside our method, which is basically this block here. So this chunk of code will only be executed when our task is over. So when we already get our result, and then this chunk of code will be executed. So this is a asynchronous block here. I'll show you what's the difference between like execute something on the main thread and execute something in this block. So for example, on our main thread, let's make this thing make this method sleep for 10 seconds after the task. So let's see. What will it be look like? Okay. So everything like happening outside this block will be executed like one step by one step, so in order. So you can see we already get our cats, but since we are blocking things happening on main thread by sleeping 10 seconds, so the loading time of our main screen here actually just delayed for 1 second, and you can see in 10 seconds. So as you can see in those 10 seconds, the screen here is just totally blank, and nothing is appearing. We cannot do anything with it. So if we instead move this into our asynchronous block, so for example, after yeah, actually to see the fact, let me put it before this add cats. So this will also like cause 10 seconds delays before we actually add all the cats we fetched into our like array. But because this is happening on a background thread, it won't like block anything in our user interface. So let's run it again. Okay. Okay. So we can go to our cats. You can see nothing is here because although we got our cats, we are like sleeping 10 seconds here. So we can go back and do something else. And just heading around, go back here. You can see the cats has been added to the dictionary. So nice. Yeah, so this is like the most apparent difference between synchronous and asynchronous chunk of code. Okay, so now the next thing, I'll actually show you how to write our own completion handler, because this chunk of code is actually just something that will be passed as parameter to this method. So this is not like some completion handler written by us. So how to actually write a method that requires a completion handler? So it's pretty easy. So we will just have to add a parameter which is of type of a function. So that means it'll have an error in its type declaration. So we want to pass this array of dictionary back to whoever called this method, and instead of like dealing with the data inside the array here, we'll let the caller to decide like what to do with the data here. So we want this function to receive an array of dictionary, and we don't want anything to be returned, so it's array to void type of function. So this is a method or function, and then instead of doing these stuff here, we will just call this method and pass our array of dictionary into it. So the caller, whoever called this method, they will have to write their own chunk of code representing this completion handler, and that chunk of code will decide like what to do with the result here. So I have to unwrap this first, and also I'll have to actually, I'll have to like mark a escape keyword there. So here, this is because so this keyword basically tells Xcode that this, like the chunk of code in this completion handler, it will be alive even after this method is over. So if it's like non-escaping, then all the pointers in like the pointing to this method will be gone when this method is finished. So everything inside it will be like freed. But since we are running stuff on a background thread, we actually don't know when will this be like finished. So we actually want to maintain some extra reference to this block. So we basically just want it to be alive even after this like we reach the end of this main like method. Okay, so after passing our result to our completion handler, we can just delete everything here. So now we have to go back to our view controller class. So now instead of doing nothing here, now it will like require us to pass in a completion handler. So you can see now we have to actually write a closure here. So we can name this array of dictionary whatever we want. So I will just name it results, and then paste the stuff we had before here. So match the name result. So for dictionary result, so let image URL be da da da, and I'll try to get the contents, and then we'll add the cat to our cat array. Alright, so yeah, if you remember, you can see like this this format here is like super similar to this thing here, right? So they both have like an in keyword, and these are the parameters provided by the completion handler, and this chunk of code is just something dealing with the parameters. All right, so now let's run our asynchronous version of loading cats. Of dealing with cats. So usually in many apps written by app dev, we usually want to create a completion handler here for our network connection methods, because we don't want anything happening in this chunk of code blocking the user interface stuff happening on the main thread. So go to my cats. Yeah, you can see everything is like working as usual. So that means our complete handler here is working and it's valid. Alright, so yeah, that's basically so much for today, and thank you for watching.